Hello, I'm Neil Kirby at the Red Rubber Ball Company, and welcome to today's call. Thank you for joining me. What I'd like to do today is share with you some thoughts and my experiences from coaching over the years, specifically around choice. And I think it's probably the one topic that I spend the most time talking to clients around. So this notion of choice and responsibility, personal responsibility. And I think it's probably the thing that if people can really get it, if you really understand how choice can have a big impact on your life, then I think potentially it's the one thing that can make the biggest impact. And I think that's really about the attitude that you take, choice therefore being very central to the attitude you take in your life generally, whether that's at work or outside of work. So this webinar is going to run for about 45 minutes. So that gives us about 35 minutes of ideas, tips and tricks if you like, and that leaves some time towards the end for questions. Please do post questions if you have them. You'll see on your screen in the sidebar that you should have on probably on the right hand side of your screen. Towards the bottom there, there's a box for questions. Please do feel free to post any questions there that you may have. And if we have time at the end, I'll get round to dealing with some of those. If there are questions that if we run out of time and I'm not able to answer all of those, then I will come back to you after the recording and try and answer them as best as I can. You'll see some slides on the screen. Again, I'll make sure that you get those afterwards, so we'll email those out to you together with a copy of the recording of this webinar. So you should get those fairly shortly after the end of the recording. So just a little bit about me to start with, for those who are not familiar with me. I spent probably the last 15 years coaching. I started around kind of 1999, 2000. And over that time I've been coaching business owners, directors, managers, leaders of companies of all sorts of sizes, from sole practitioner, managed businesses, all the way through to leaders, directors, managers of multinationals. So companies of all sizes and across all sorts of sectors. And together with them, I've worked with community leaders, trustees within community groups and charities, worked with teenagers and even with younger children, both here and abroad. And what I'd like to do therefore today is share some of my experiences with you, things that I've learned, things that have worked for me, things that I implement into my daily routine and into my regular practice, both personally and how we run the business here, and also things that I've seen my clients do, things that have worked, again, in some cases things that haven't worked necessarily for them. And in particular, in relation to choice and how thinking about the choice that you have in your life, choice around your actions, choice about your behavior, choice about how you think, how that improves our chances of success. Because I think the more I work with people, the more I see that there isn't one way of doing things. Whatever it happens to be that we want, there is no one solution. There is no one template, blueprint, master plan, whatever. And again, I think if we look at the world that we live in, increasingly we see examples of people who seem to succeed, in some cases doing what we think are perhaps all the wrong things. And yet the more they do them, the more popular they might become. So there are different ways of getting to the same result. I think all we can do is do what we think is the right thing, the thing that will give us the best chance of success, the things that will improve our chances, and see what happens. And we'll come on to that a little bit later, because again, I think that is part of the frame of the kind of attitude that successful people, whether it's in business or outside of business, the kind of frame that they set for their lives. So one key aspect, I think, is particularly with regards to coaching, is this ability to learn. And I think obviously I would say that because of my background, but I think those people who come to coaching and those people who really engage with it, what they look for is they're looking to learn something about themselves or their situation. And I think that's really critical of people who are the most successful. It's not so much where you are now in your life or the experiences that you've had to date, it's what you're prepared to learn from here on in, what you're prepared to perhaps do differently that will dictate the success that you have in the future. So obviously in coaching, we encourage our clients, we encourage people generally to look at what you've done so far. So by all means assess what's got you to where you are, because the things that you've done so far, the things that you've been successful in, clearly that's worked, and therefore I think it's important to recognize that. I think sometimes we actually have probably done more, achieved more than even we think or even we realize. And sometimes it takes other people to notice that and actually point it out. So I think it's really worthwhile to spend a few minutes just reflecting on what you've succeeded at, the things that you've done, the things that you've achieved, maybe make a note of them, and just reflect on, again, your talents, your expertise, the things that you've done, the way that you've thought, that's actually got you to that point. Because again, the things that have worked, keep doing them and do them consistently. And I think that notion of doing things consistently is really key, because I come across many people, many organizations who have done what seem to be the right things. They've done them for a short period of time and then got out of the habit or stopped when the going gets tough. Again, I think we all know the situation of, we start off a new year, go along to the gym because we want to get fitter or we want to lose weight, and we may sign up. Some people never get beyond that. Some people may go along once or twice, but then maybe it's a cold day or we've got something else on or we're feeling a bit tired. We miss out, and once we've missed, it then becomes easier to find another excuse the following week not to go. And therefore, yeah, great idea. We started out with good intentions, but we didn't see it through. And I think that in many ways, one of the things that sets aside the really successful people or really successful businesses is not what they do, but the fact that they do it consistently. They do it long enough for it to become a habit, and long enough, therefore, for it to have a real impact on either on their life or on their business. So I think recognize the things that you have done, recognize the success, be proud of the things that you've achieved. Because again, it's one of those things that we should be able to be proud of what we've achieved, and not exactly bask in your own glory, but recognize it, allow that to boost your confidence. Because again, people quite often say about how can we improve confidence, how do we improve self-esteem if we're, say, at work, we've got to tackle something we haven't done before. Maybe we're starting to operate at a slightly higher level, or we've got to go into, say, I don't know, a board meeting when we haven't been to board meetings before, or we're working with a new client or a group of people who are very capable. How do we build our confidence? Well, I think the more I work with people, my experience is that the way that we build confidence is by just doing stuff, by doing the very things that to some extent we might fear, put ourselves in situations that are new to us. And it's that way that, if you like, we don't get the confidence first and then go off and do something. It's the other way around. We have to go out and do things, and the more we do it, the more confident we become. Okay, so confidence in many ways becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't think there's any shortcut to that. We just have to put ourselves in situations that are new or perhaps unfamiliar. And the more we do that, the more confident we get. So for me, looking back at what you've achieved in the past is a great way to allow you to build some of that confidence by recognizing the things that you have done in the past. So I think the other thing that in coaching, and again, for people who are truly successful or the most successful, is they're particularly good at learning from things that they haven't yet achieved or things that didn't go so well. And I think this is really key. It's what I call, if you like, the first lesson of successful people, and that's around how we use feedback. So if you take a look at the slide here, I think the important thing with feedback is, again, is really a kind of a frame of mind, a mindset, if you like, as to how we think about it. So we can look back on the past, and we can either choose to look back on it and reflect on, I don't know, maybe what didn't go so well. And for some people, we kind of get down on ourselves. We can be very self-critical. We can look back at things that we haven't achieved or things that didn't go so well and thing again, delegation's a good example. I know a number of people who have delegated work to other people, and maybe it didn't go as well as they wanted, that when they went to check on the person, the work wasn't done to the standard that they wanted, or it hadn't been completed on time and they'd had to finish it. Now, the issue there is not that delegation was the wrong idea, it was just that perhaps in that case we didn't delegate it quite in the way that we might have done. Maybe we needed to give the person a little bit more guidance. Maybe we needed to monitor them a little bit more closely. So it wasn't that delegation was wrong. However, what happens for some people is we say, oh, well, I tried that, it didn't work. I knew it wouldn't work, I won't do that again. And so we use that experience kind of almost to say, well, I'm not going to try again because it didn't work the first time. I think what happens with the most successful people is they look at those situations and kind of look at it with a mindset of saying, well, okay, just because it didn't work last time doesn't necessarily mean to say it's the wrong thing. Clearly, delegation in many situations is a good idea. So the way to look at it is to think, okay, I want to do that again. I think I can do it more successfully. What can I learn from it so that next time I'm able to do it better? What can I change about me? How can I manage the situation? Can I brief them more clearly? Can I be clearer about exactly what it is that we want to, what the outcome is? Maybe I need to describe it in clearer terms. Maybe I need to monitor them and check in on them more closely, that type of thing. So what are the things that I can do to give myself a better chance of delegating effectively and therefore the other person completing the work better? So again, I think what the most successful people do is they bring it back to themselves and look at what can they do, what can we do in order to improve our chances. And therefore, looking at the future, the past is there for us to learn from, and immediately we see things that we can learn from and perhaps do differently, then we're looking to the future, because in the future, if we change things about the way that we operate, maybe change some of our behavior, maybe become more disciplined or become more organized about how we complete things, then we're giving ourselves the very best chance of succeeding. And again, the reality about the past is that there's nothing we can do about it. The past has happened. We can't change it. Therefore, the key thing is not to spend too long dwelling on it. Look back long enough to learn something from it, but then start looking forward and getting on with things that we can change, things that we can influence. So again, an example of maybe how we can look at that, and I had one just very recently myself, in that we happened to send out a mailing to clients and contacts, again similar to the sort of mailing that you probably got before this session. But the mailing went out to somebody who shouldn't have been on our mailing list. And I got an email from them, and they complained because they felt that we'd spammed them, that they hadn't asked to be put on our mailing list. And now, as you can imagine, I was disappointed to get the complaint. My aim is I want us to be as professional in what we do, in everything that we can do. And so for me, I was very disappointed to get the complaint. And so I guess I've got a number of options. I can either argue with the customer and say about whether they'd wanted to be in that situation and defend what we did, because my motives were certainly, I felt my motives were perfectly fine. Or we could just ignore it, do nothing, hope it goes away, ignore the email or the phone call or whatever it might be, stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it didn't really happen. Or we can look at the situation as an opportunity, as a chance to really improve things. And I think certainly with things like complaints or when things don't go so well, then if we deal with it quickly, we learn something from it, then it can be a real bonus. And again, it's one of those things that no matter what's happened in the past, no matter what situation we're in, we can take that viewpoint. So for example, some of you may well listen to TED Talks, So if not, then take a look at TED.com, TED.com, because they record some fantastic presentations by people with all sorts of experience and disciplines around the world. And so just recently I was listening to a guy called Isaac Lidsky, Lidsky, who in his speech he was talking about vision, and he talked in there and described the fact that going blind was for him a profound blessing. Now, that's not the way that I think most people would imagine a blind person speaking. And so for him, that frame of mind, that way of thinking, that him going blind was a blessing, was a gift, if you like, because he then went on to describe it. He said, in fact, going blind was what gave him true vision. Now, that's a fantastic frame of mind, the way he thinks about the world, and that notion of choice, because I think, again, to put this in the context of choice, he had a very clear choice as to how he views himself. He could see himself as being disabled, as being somebody who life's not fair, that going blind actually would limit his chances of success or his options in life. And yet he very clearly chose to see that as an opportunity. So rather than it be a threat, if you like, or a weakness or an issue, he decided to choose that going blind was going to be, I wouldn't say the best thing that ever happened to him, but quite possibly. He certainly chose to see it as a gift. And again, I think therefore it's not so much the situation, whether he could see or whether he was blind, but it was his mindset, his frame of mind, his attitude that in fact has created the success that he's had. And he now leads a very successful business, has a very, very happy and fulfilling family life as well. And I think that all stems not from his situation, but from his frame of mind and what he's chosen to learn from the situation he's in. So I think some of this comes from what I call a kind of feedback loop, and this is something that I see within businesses, but also very definitely something within sport. So success, whatever it is, comes primarily from how we learn and how we then implement the things that we learn. So if you take a look at the slide here, what you've got is that no matter where we start, if we want to be more successful, the key thing starts really with feedback at the bottom. So if we get feedback either from ourselves, from things that we notice, from our own observations, things that we say to ourselves, if we take that as feedback, we then make small adjustments to our daily routines, to our behavior, to the way we think. We then practice those adjustments, and then we notice what happens. Does that make a difference? Does it work? Maybe it might not initially. Do we need to try it again before we build our skills? So if we keep going around that loop, the more times we go around the loop, the more successful we'll be. And therefore, again, this fits in with this notion of learning. So when things happen, if they go well, great, give yourself a pat on the back, do more purposeful practice, try it again. If it doesn't go well, or it's not quite the way you want, or you don't get the result you want, it's just feedback. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything about us, about you or me as a person. It's just feedback. It's just an opportunity to learn something else that will help us in the future. And the more we learn, the more adjustments we can make, the more we can practice better stuff or different stuff, the more successful we'll be. And again, that in business, that's sort of a continuous improvement loop. In sport, that's absolutely the key to success in sport. So no matter where we start, potentially the more we go around the loop, the more successful we'll be. Now in sport, if you happen to start very young, then you've got more opportunity to go around the loop from a very early age, and perhaps you can achieve greater success at an earlier stage. But in principle, no matter where we start and when we start, the key to success is whether we're prepared to just take it as feedback, not get too bogged down about what it means about us and our ego and stuff like that. It's just feedback. So make the adjustments and practice doing things slightly differently. And I think that takes us onto choice very clearly. because we, if you like, how we choose to respond to feedback that we get, whether we get down on ourselves and stop doing things, or whether we choose to just take it as feedback and say, right, okay, what can I learn? How can I improve things? That absolutely is a choice. Okay, in the same way that Isaac had a choice how to view himself, how to think about himself. No, okay, other people will have a view, but ultimately it's what he, what you, what I think about ourselves and our situation that is the most important thing. So for me, it was kind of brought home some years ago when I was talking to a client of mine. He walked into my office and he was a big guy with a leather jacket, came in on his motorbike, an owner of a business that had in the past been fairly successful. And his business was starting to struggle. And as the business had a bit of a downturn, he started getting quite cautious. He was afraid of making the wrong decisions because he didn't want the business to suffer anymore. And therefore he stopped making decisions because he wanted to wait and make sure he got the right decision. He wanted to be perfect, if you like, to get things right. So he stopped responding quickly to inquiries. Customers then started to notice and they stopped calling. And as a result, business did dry up. And he got into this vicious circle where as the business started to struggle more, he became more cautious and it got out of hand. And so when he walked in, he described himself as having the weight of the world on his shoulders. And if you looked at him, that's exactly what you would have seen, kind of hunched shoulders, somebody who was really, life was a real burden to him. And so as we spoke, we talked for a while and he realized the consequences of what was happening was to some extent a result of his behavior. The way he was thinking and the way that he was then acting was to some extent leading to his customers' response and what was happening within his business, the lack of sales and profitability. And when he realized, therefore, that he had a choice as to how to respond, okay, he couldn't now change the situation he was in quickly. Okay, it wasn't just suddenly going to miraculously go away and everything would be okay overnight. But he realized he absolutely had a choice about what he did next. And so when he realized that that was very much down to him, he could either sit there and blame other people. But the problem then is if we blame other people or we blame our misfortune, if we say life's not fair, then by blaming other people, there's no incentive for us to do anything differently. And we then become a victim, if you like. We become quite passive, waiting for other people to make decisions on our behalf. Whereas if we take this notion of choice and personal responsibility, then we can look at the situation we're in and say, okay, so to some extent, I've got some responsibility here. I've put myself in this situation to a greater or lesser extent. Most importantly, what can I do now to change the situation, to give myself a better chance of success in the future? And I think that's the key. It's not so much what we've done to get us into that situation, but that's where I am now. What can I do? Because anything I do differently will potentially change the situation, will give me a better chance of success in the future. And I think that's where choice very much comes in. So he had a choice about what he did next. He walked out looking a different man. Again, his shoulders were no longer hunched. He went out and made certain decisions about himself and how he viewed himself and how he was going to run the business. He made some decisions almost that day, and his business started to change as a result. And I think that's the key, really, for me here about how we respond. So we may not choose our situation, but we most definitely can choose how we respond to it. Okay. Again, I think in the world that we live in nowadays, the world itself is far too complicated for us to control everything, but we can have an impact on ourselves, the things, what it is that we do next, whether we choose to do something, whether we choose to put it off, whether we choose to pretend to ignore it and hope that it goes away. So we can make life easier for ourselves, I think, in some ways, and therefore how we view feedback is just one of those. I had an example again of this just recently with a client of mine that I was speaking to. And in his situation, he was enjoying the work that he was doing. He liked the company. He had no intentions of changing. But he described his situation and he said, it feels like at the moment everything's a fight. And it's really kind of frustrating because I don't seem to be making any progress. I'm kind of pushing all the time at other people and everything seems to be quite difficult. And then we got talking about what it was that he enjoyed about his work and the company he worked for and what he was doing. And he said one of the key things was that it was a challenge. And he enjoyed the idea of pushing himself, striving to do things better or differently. He was ambitious and wanted to progress, and particularly to progress within that business. And when he talked about the challenge, I just encouraged him to think about the situation in terms of, well, is it a challenge or is it a fight? What's the difference? And in many ways, you get to choose which way you view it, because both were right, both were wrong. It was his call as to how he saw his situation. And therefore, if he started to look at it as a challenge, he became more inspired, more motivated to get out there and do something. Whereas if he saw it as a fight, then actually that had the opposite effect. And so he realized at that moment that actually that was absolutely was a choice. On a day-to-day basis, he could consciously or unconsciously think about his situation as a challenge. And if he saw it as a challenge, then he went into work more motivated. He would take on the things that needed doing in a very different manner. And going into it with that mindset, the likelihood is he was going to be more successful. Okay, because again, part of it is if we think it's going to be a fight, to some extent we almost set ourselves up to get what we think. If we think it's going to be a fight, there is a risk that that's what we end up getting, or certainly that's how we end up feeling. So this notion again of choice, I think, was really important in how he reframed his situation. So I think it's important that we recognize, or certainly for the most successful people, I think they recognize that there are no guarantees. Success is not guaranteed. So worrying about making the right decision, actually to some extent, it's kind of a little bit pointless. There are no guarantees, so all we can do is do what we think is the right thing to do right now. And if we do the right things often enough, then we improve our chances. But no guarantee. So again, there's no guarantee that just because we do the right marketing things that customers are going to come flooding through the door, or we're going to make the sales that we need. There's no guarantee that if we treat staff within our team the way that we think they should, that they'll respond and they'll immediately start doing the things that we want. But if we do what we think are the right things, then we give ourselves the best chance. If that doesn't work, then again we take it as feedback, we observe it, and we tweak it. We do something differently next time to see if that will work instead. Sometimes it is about trial and error, both within business and in life generally. As I said, there are no guarantees that doing certain things are always going to work. I remember a few years ago, some of you may remember Boris Becker, the tennis player, and back in the late 80s, Boris, I think at 17, became the youngest winner of the men's title at Wimbledon, and was courted as being the next great thing in tennis. And just a couple of years later, after he won for the first time, he got beaten in the second round by someone who at the time was a relative unknown. And the media, as you can imagine, got down on Boris and were curious about, gosh, was it a flash in the pan? Was this the end of the world? That sort of thing. And interesting enough, in a report after the game, Boris was interviewed and he responded by saying, quite simply, I didn't lose a war. Nobody died. Basically, I just lost a tennis match. And I think that's one of a really great frame of mind to have. And again, I think for successful people, particularly in this year of all years, if there are things that we want to do that we haven't yet done, a lot of it is down to us and how we choose to respond. So like Boris said, okay, in life, not everything is going to go the way that we want. We're not going to have everything we want first time. But in most cases, it's not the end of the world. It's not life or death for many of us in our daily lives. We just have to treat it as feedback, adjust something, and go again. Give ourselves another chance. Because again, we can either choose to take it very personally and stop, hold us back, or we just look at it and say, okay, well, I still want to do it. I'm going to do it again anyway, and see if next time I can do it differently or do it better. And so again, I think that lifestyle, that mindset is very key. And again, as you may know, Boris went on to win all 4 major titles. He won the Davis Cup with Germany. He had an unbelievably successful career. And I think a lot of that came not just from his skill, but from his mindset and the way he bounced back or he responded when things didn't quite work out. So I think, again, particularly with many of those things, we see it sometimes with sales where we can get disappointed, we can get put off if we're making sales calls or we're contacting prospects and they don't buy from us immediately. But again, when you think about it, why should they? Why should everybody that we speak to, everybody that we come across, why should they become customers? Why should they become clients? They've got their own agendas, they've got things they want. The key is not to expect everybody to become a client, but to think, okay, so what can I do to find those people who do want to be clients, who do want to buy from us? That's our challenge, is just to go out there and find the right people rather than try and hit on everybody and have this expectation that they all should buy. So I think certainly being realistic is important. And again, I think, remember that the more ambitious you are, the more difficult you make life to some extent, the more challenging it becomes. The easy thing in life is to just stick to doing what we've always done. Whereas if we're ambitious, if we set ourselves a higher target, then you are making life a little bit more difficult. So it's to be expected that things don't always go according to plan. Okay. So for me, one of the things that I set out, when we set out to put together the Red Rubber Ball Company a few years ago, one of the things that we did was we sat down and said, right, what's important to us? Because this business is going to take up quite a lot of our time. We spend a lot of time at work, so it's important that we spend that time doing things that we really want to do. So we asked ourselves that question, okay, what's important? And the 4 things that came up for me were the 4 that I've listed here. So time with my family, I realized it was important to take part in adventures, the coaching element of making a difference to people's lives, but also the bottom there, to hang out with what I called cool people. So people who do things differently, who are interesting, who, if you like, are a little bit perhaps unconventional in some ways. And for me, that was a really good exercise to do, just to ask what's important, because now we use those 4 criteria to dictate what projects we do and what things we take on, and basically, therefore, how I spend my time. Again, the great thing is I can very much dictate how I want to do things, and that's largely because of choice. I chose to work the way that I do, and therefore, if there are projects come along or if I meet people who talk about activities, if they fit with those criteria, then it's more likely that I'll take them on. Whereas if they don't fit with those, then it becomes an easy decision for me to say, that sounds interesting, I wish you well with it, but it's not for me. And so for me, just identifying what was really important, I thought was a really good thing. And that's an exercise that I really encourage. So again, for me, one of the things, therefore, that threw up was we took a trip to Kilimanjaro just about a year ago now. And when we started out, this was the view on the ground as we were driving towards the mountain from the airport. And as you look at things, sometimes from a distance, you can see the goal that you have in mind, the thing that you want, and it might look a long way off. And again, I remember driving along the road, suddenly thinking, blimey, the top of Kilimanjaro looked an awfully long way away. It looked hard work to get there. That's a lot of walking and a lot of climbing to get to the top. And again, one of those things, if we spend too long looking at it or thinking about it like this, it can become quite daunting and we can become quite overwhelmed. The key thing then is to recognize that if we want to get to the top of anything, in most cases it's just about taking enough small steps. And certainly Kili was absolutely like that. So for us and the group that were with us, it was about taking enough small steps over 4, 5, 6 days that it took us. And if we could do that, then we had a chance of getting the top. There was no guarantee, but we had a chance. And again, I think one of the key things here is that each of those small steps we could all take. It was just a question, and none of those small steps were particularly difficult. It was just a case of, could we be bothered, were we prepared to do enough of those small steps that would then give us the chance of getting to the top. And that was the key for us, was were we prepared to just keep going and taking those small steps, recognizing that it's going to take time. We weren't just suddenly going to get to the top, wake up one morning and, oh gosh, that was lucky we got there. And I think that's the key. And if you do enough of those small steps, then you give yourself the chance. You might get the opportunity to see the view from the top, or to get that feeling of achievement, success, monetary reward, whatever it is that you're looking for, by achieving the things that you want. And that's why I think with some of the adventures we choose to take on, and with that one we took a group of Kenyan kids with us and gave them a real opportunity of a lifestyle, an opportunity of a lifetime. So for us, those kind of activities are really important, both for myself, for ourselves, and for those people that we do them with. So one of the things that I do then is sit down every 6 months or so and put together, update what you see in front of you now, which is a vision board. And for me, that's really important because, and I talk about things that I want to be, do, and have. And so just to map out very, very simply some of the things that I might want to be, do, and have, not particularly this year, not particularly next, but at some point in the future. And first of all, it's just putting them down on paper. So, okay, here I've put some pictures, but we may just, you might just write words or scribbles onto a blank sheet of paper. And every 6 months then I sit down and think, right, I can't do all of this. I haven't got the time to do all of this right now. So which ones am I going to focus on right now? Which ones am I going to focus on over the next 6 months? So the areas that you see in pink or orange here, these are the ones that I focused on. In fact, this was what's on my wall at the moment over the last 6 months. Some of these we've now completed, have been done. But this is what has been my focus for the last 6 months. And you'll see some of these. I just take one of them, for example. Diving with hammerhead sharks. I don't particularly know, I've been diving a couple of times, I don't particularly know why hammerheads hold such an appeal. There's no time scale for that. I don't know whether it'll happen this year, next year, whenever, but at some point it's one of those things that I'd like to do. So right now I'm not doing anything about that. It will just sit there as an ambition for some point in the future. Whereas things like Rio was something that I could do something about over the last year. So for the year or so leading up to that, my wife and I decided it was something that we'd like to do. So we applied to be volunteers for the Olympics and Paralympics. So that then became a project, and we then mapped out and thought, right, okay, so what do we need to do? And so I generally just ask the question, what do you need to do to make it happen? To think not about how we're going to get there, but what's the next thing that we can do? So what can you do right now that will move that a step forward? So for us, it started out with actually putting in the application, because until we'd done that, we had no way of knowing whether we would even get a place. Once we'd done the application and we got accepted, we started to do some Portuguese classes. And then we started to think through step by step, okay, what do we need to do? We'll need to find accommodation, book flights, all of those kind of things. And so during the summer of 2016, we were therefore able to spend 6 weeks out in Rio, and again take part in another adventure, if you like. So that's one of the key things that I do, that I encourage clients to do, and I've seen many other successful people do, is realize that you can't do everything that you might want to do. And again, if you look at choice then in connection with time, I think that's really where the key is. We quite often talk about making time or creating time, and actually that's really a bit of a myth or an illusion. We can't make time. Each of us has 24 hours in the day. Today, tomorrow, the day after. The key question is, how do we choose to spend that time? So treat your time as a valuable resource, as something you only get once, something that's really useful. And then decide how you're going to spend it. How are you going to use the time, the 24 hours that you have today, tomorrow, the next day? How are you going to spend that? And for me, it's about spending it doing the things that are really important. So that's partly from the exercises that I've just shown. So things that I want to do in life generally, things that are important to me at work. So you can either set those yourselves, decide for yourself what's important, or you may, if you work for another organization, you may need to talk to your boss, look at your development plans or your objectives for the year, get really clear on what it is that your boss wants from you, what's expected of you, and therefore identify in that context what's really important, because that's what's potentially then that allows you to dictate what are you going to do next, and what are you going to do next, what's the most important thing. And I think then bear in mind some of those long-term projects. If you want to do those, then you're going to have to start sometime. So remember the long-term projects, and you can be doing things with those to get started. So again, if we keep putting them off, we're never going to get there. So don't just focus on the immediate things, the short-term things. Be doing tasks, do something about the long-term projects as well. And I think then that does give you a better chance of being successful in the future. Okay. So I'm mindful of time and therefore dealing with some questions. So I've got a question here which says, how do you decide of all the things that you could do what you should do? And I think for me it comes back to that phrase that I just mentioned. So what do you need to do to make it happen is a phrase that I use a lot with clients and people that I'm working with. So when you're aware of things that are important, things that you've got on your desk or things that you want to do, that, again, a bit like Kilimanjaro, it's no point looking at the summit. It's about saying, right, what's the next thing that I can do? I have to start somewhere. What can I do next? What can I do right now that will move me a step closer? What's the next immediate thing that I can do? Then focus on doing that, because again, it's about actually then taking all of those small steps. So that question, what do you need to do to make it happen, for me is a really key one, about chunking down and understanding what's the next step. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful. If you have got other questions, please do put them in the box, or feel free to email them to me afterwards. That's neil@redrubberball.co.uk, Neil. If there are things that you want to do next, we then set out this last year to run a mentoring program. We sponsor kids out in Kenya as one of our other activities. And having worked with lots of these children a couple of years ago, they said that they wanted to set up or could we set up a mentoring program, matching them with people from Kenyan businesses to help them with their development, largely in the way that many organizations work here in the UK. So we then set up a pilot. So for us, the next thing that, if you like, what do you do to make it, what do you need to do to make it happen? Our question was, or our answer then was, okay, let's set up a pilot program. And as part of the pilot, we can then identify who the mentors will be, find the students, we need somebody to organize it, think about the methodology behind the mentoring program and how it's going to work, and we'll find the funding. And it was then about just breaking them down, if you like, and taking action for each of the things then that we identified. So for us, one of the key things was that we talked about finding mentors. So for me, I didn't know where to start finding mentors out in Nairobi, but I thought, okay, what do I know? What do I do here in the UK that works? So LinkedIn for me is a really good tool, a really good resource. So I went onto LinkedIn. I did some searching for the people that I thought might be useful. So people in HR or corporate social responsibility. I connected with them, or I sent invites. When we'd connected, I then followed up and asked if they'd like to meet. And for those that we met with, I then asked them, would they become a mentor? So again, it was one step at a time, just working with what I knew, what I'd done before that had worked. Okay, and I think that way I firmly believe that the future, if you think about choice and the choice that you have, that it is in your hands, not that there's any guarantee that the things that you'll do will work, but do the things that seem to make sense, that you think is the right thing. If you keep doing them often enough, then you give yourself the best chance. And if it's not quite working, or if the results are not what you want, then you have the choice to do something slightly different. Learn from it, tweak it, behave slightly differently, and that will get you different results. So the next thing for you, there are some things that we can do, or I can do. We run a couple of programs, as well as the individual coaching, one-to-one coaching, if you need any further help. We run 2 group programs, one for business leaders, one for managers. If you want any more details on those programs, you can see the web pages are listed. And if you would like to do anything, or if you do need any further help, if you quote Choice 17 in anything, then that will get you a 10% discount on any of the products or services that we're offering over the next period. So thank you very much for your support. We will email you directly shortly with a copy of the recording and a copy of the slides that you can see on screen. And again, if you have any further questions, please just come back to me, and that's neil@redrubberball.co.uk. Thank you for your time.